Incoming bracket!
What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest doubleheader review. This is obviously a doubleheader. I'll be focusing on two movies done by HBO Max and Warner Brothers in a non-spoiler fashion. Those two movies are No Sudden Move and, of course, Space Jam: A New Legacy. I will first talk about No Sudden Move, and then obviously I'll talk about Space Jam: A New Legacy in non-spoiler fashion. So all that exposition aside, guys, let's get started. So No Sudden Move is a movie that I had no idea what it was about other than it was a Steven Soderbergh movie. That's right, the same guy that did the Ocean's trilogy. I'm a pretty big fan of his. I'm actually currently trying to watch all of his films. I've seen half of his films, and I have a great deal of respect for him because as a filmmaker, it was really honestly inspiring to see that how much he's experimental with filmmaking, particularly cinematography. Like cinematography, he literally shot 2 movies on an iPhone. So for me, it just showed that, wow, a director who can afford probably any camera literally films 2 movies on something that anyone can pretty much afford, at least the average person, I should say. So it really inspired me, and obviously I took to that. So I dug that. And he continues his trend of experimental filmmaking with this movie. No Sudden Move is a movie that a lot of people seem to not really like the cinematography for, which I think is a shame. See, the movie has a fish lens over it. I don't know if that was done in post-production. I would assume so. But there's this fish lens, so it feels a bit wavy towards the end. And I know a lot of people that don't like that because it feels very distracting. For myself, is it noticeable? Yes. But I personally dug that choice because I thought that it really kind of showcased that something is a little off, in the scene. And it just kind of, for me, represented that, yes, this is a movie that's all about how something is off. Characters are double-crossing each other left and right. There are a lot of twists and turns with these characters and everything. So I think a movie that's dealing with that, it's kind of fitting that, the way it's shot is also to represent that. That's how I took it, at least. And also on top of that, the lighting, the color grading, I liked all of that too. I thought it was really good. A lot of movies that use a lot of color of gray, usually it's very bland looking, but this movie had that color usage, but it didn't feel bland. And I think it might have also been because it also used the color blue a lot. So the combination of the two I thought was really good, honestly. The cast is also really good. No big standout roles for me personally, although I will say Brendan Fraser, it was very nice seeing him back. It's been a long time. I think the last movie I saw of his was honestly Inkheart, which came out 10 years ago. So I'm glad that he's coming back into the world of acting, at least in terms of mainstream. I know he's also doing a Darren Aronofsky movie with A24. I think it's coming out next year. So I'm very happy to see that he's getting work. And honestly, his small role that he was good. The acting across the board is good, though, per se. I also liked the twists and turns nature. I do have some issues with that. I'll get in the negatives, but I do like the fact that this movie does feel unpredictable. It's not at the very beginning you're yeah, it's going to pan out like this. It's no, there was stuff that happens. Literally something happened 30 minutes in, and I was like, all right, well, that sets the stakes. I don't know how this is going to go. And sure enough, I didn't. I enjoyed that aspect. And I can definitely see myself rewatching this movie because I feel there's a lot of details and everything from the production design to the costume design that maybe upon multiple viewings I'll be able to appreciate even more because I liked that stuff. I really did. But it just seems there's a lot in this movie that, it might not just be one of those first viewing type movies where you actually have to watch it multiple times. And I like that. I like that in a movie. I don't like it where it's a one and done type situation. So props to, again, Soderbergh working with the script that he did. But going to negatives, because I do want to talk about that. The reason why this movie for first viewing I thought was okay to solid is because although I like the twists and turns and the originality of it, I didn't like the fact that the characters I didn't really care too much about. Again, I liked the fact that the characters were unpredictable in their actions, but I did think that the development left a lot to be desired. When things happen to certain characters, I found myself a bit distant. Almost like a fly on the wall, which I feel would be a good approach, but the problem is there are certain scenes that you're supposed to try to feel a bit emotional, but it didn't really resonate with me personally. The ending also, I was just kind of it's okay, I suppose. But it's just mostly that whole aspect, as well as just the story itself. I liked it. I liked the unpredictability, but I feel the story mixed in with the characters, I thought that sometimes it left a lot to be desired. And that's really it. I mean, again, this could just be similar to Pig, which I also am reviewing. It could be just that movie too, where it's like it's a first viewing type issue, where it's not really necessarily something that I hate, because truth be told, I don't hate the fact that the characters are two-dimensional, but it is something that holds it back from being something I can fully embrace, like say Ocean's 11. But nonetheless, No Sudden Move, in a world where we are literally blown to pieces with, IP, stuff such as like Marvel and like Star Wars. It's nice to see a filmmaker like Soderbergh give us a movie like this that feels, unique in its approach, not fully emotional, but unique in its approach. And for that alone, I will definitely be recommending this movie. And No Sudden Move, for me personally, I will give a 3.25 to 5-star rating. So for hot sauce ratings, it's the good old Frank's Red Hot Sauce. So yeah, I think it's a movie that I do want to revisit at some point in time. But that being said, can't say the same for this next movie. Space Jam: A New Legacy is the sequel to Space Jam, which came out in 1996. And going to that movie, Space Jam was a movie that I did not grow up with it the way a lot of people did. A lot of people I know, they've seen it a dozen plus times. For myself, I saw it one time, and I think I was like 12 or 13, and I did think it was hilarious. There were so many scenes I remember cracking up with, and I remember just dying. So many scenes. I couldn't help myself. But I wanted to revisit it from the eyes and perspectives of who I am today. So I watched this on a Thursday night, the day before, I was going to see it in theaters with friends. And I watched it, and I didn't laugh at all. In fact, I was like, wow, this is a terrible movie. And my expectations were even lower. Like, I wasn't really excited for a Space Jam 2, aka, The New Legacy. I wasn't excited for it to begin with. I kept my expectations really low, but my expectations went even lower because I was like, oh no, here we go. And honestly, right from the beginning, I was like, yikes, what have I got myself into? This movie is almost 2 hours long. The first Space Jam was I believe it was an hour and 20 minutes without credits. So this sequel has 30 to 40 minutes in addition to the original. And it's not needed. It tries to build this whole relationship in the beginning, and it just doesn't work out because it feels very cookie cutter. There's very little that honestly differentiates it from other movies that you've seen in the past. Even honestly, movies geared towards kids, you've seen a lot of better ones. And that's not necessarily to say that kids aren't going to enjoy this movie. I think that they will. It is a bright, colorful movie. It is shot, I believe, on film. Could be wrong about that, but I do believe it's shot on film. And, there were some shots that I did think early on were honestly kind of neat, especially in the real world. I thought those shots were a lot better than, honestly, when it went into the, the fake world, like the Looney Tunes world. I thought those shots, they weren't bad per se, but they did leave a lot to be desired. They weren't as, interesting. But, so it has that going for it. And then the cast is enjoyable. I do think that they're kind of wasted, but they are enjoyable for what they're given. But, for a movie that I don't like highly, I'm not going to sit here and say it's the worst thing I've ever seen. It's not. It's a terrible movie in my opinion. But I can definitely see why some people might like it, because what I found myself doing while watching the movie was I found myself doing this a lot whenever it was literally essentially advertising movies that, hey, guess what, are on HBO Max and that also are done by Warner Brothers. It's essentially a commercial for other HBO Max and Warner Brother movies. And every single time that they essentially were trying to advertise for one of those movies that, obviously they either have in their catalog or nostalgic-based stuff, I found myself doing this, but the audience was like, oh, they were pointing to the screen I noticed that, awesome. It's like that, endorphins just kind of hitting their head, and it's like, oh, I noticed that, that's awesome. And look, if you are nostalgia-based, which, let's be honest, we live in a society where everyone pretty much is, you're probably going to like this movie. You probably really are. But for myself, I'm not as much. But I still found myself distant to the fact that this is a movie that's nostalgia-based for stuff that is on HBO Max, not for the movie that came before it, Space Jam. There's very little, in my opinion, that's connecting it to the original, which I guess is fine, because I guess you can look at it as a standalone movie. But when you're just watching essentially a 2-hour commercial for something that you already have, because I have HBO Max. Despite seeing it in theaters, I have HBO Max. And I own Mad Max Fury Road. I own Game of Thrones. I own all these properties it's advertising. It just kept taking me out of the movie because I was like, well, I could have easily been watching this movie or this show. And honestly, it made me want to watch those movies again. So, I don't know, man. It left me in shock, honestly. Just the laziness of it. Especially because here's the thing. I always say this, and I said this in my Black Widow review, and I'll say it again here. I am fine with paying homage to other movies. I'm fine with it. I do it too in my own movies. You need to have it, though, where it feels natural, or at least not necessarily natural, but you make it your own. If you're able to make it your own, that's awesome. But if you are having it where it just kind of feels like we're just shoehorning it in so that way we can have you click on HBO Max and spend $10, $15 per month, then hey, I'm sorry, I'm not about it personally. I'm not about it. I just don't like it. I think that kids are smart, and although I think kids will enjoy the colorful animation and the colorful cinematography, I do think that kids are a lot smarter than what this movie gives it credit for. The villain is laughable. I did not like Don Cheadle's character. I love Don Cheadle as an actor. I really do. But his character in this movie was insufferable. I did not like the way that he executed the dialogue. I thought that it was very forced. It was very corny. And I get it that some people like corny, but come on, man. Like, come on. The motivations were lacking very much so with this character. And the characters, again, what I like to do is I like to say that they do what I like to call just because. The characters do that just because. They do things just because. The son does things just because. And honestly, LeBron James also, like, that whole dilemma with, like, his one son, I found it honestly laughable because it's like, dude, the whole movie is trying to center around, like, LeBron James hasn't been paying attention to his son and everything, but the funny thing is, they don't even establish that early on. It's quite the opposite. They establish that, like, he is a little bit tough on his son, but, like, he's letting his son play video games, and he is showing interest in those video games and everything. So I'm like, how's that a bad dad? I'm like, how's that a bad dad? I wish I had that, you know? Like, it just left me kind of frustrated because then at the end of the movie, they're trying to get across this message of it's like, yeah, you gotta, like, I'm glad that you're paying attention to me more, Dad. It's like, you were already being paid attention to. The difference is, like, you went to this, not even gonna get into it. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. But, other negatives I wanted to mention just real quick. The pacing, again, it's very disjointed. It feels very overlong, unfortunately. The resolution just left me wanting to throw myself out a window, if I'm being honest. And then, truth be told, the game lasted way too long. They did things in the game that I was like, even for a movie that's centered around animated characters, it was outrageous and ridiculous, even in the span of this world. This movie made Ready Player One seem subtle with its references. I'm just going to leave it at that. If you like this movie, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. But for myself, I didn't like this movie. I thought that it was worse than the original. If you like and have fondness for the original, I personally would say just stick with the original. Because if you watch this sequel, you better have HBO Max, because if you don't, you are probably going to want to shoot yourself and maybe never get HBO Max, because this movie does that, honestly. Yeah, this movie's bad, guys. I'm speechless. I'm speechless. It's not good. My brain right now is currently losing brain cells from losing this movie. But as I said, if you like this movie, that is A-okay. For me personally, Space Jam: A New Legacy, I did not like it. I would be giving a 1 out of 5 star rating. So yeah, no hot sauce rating. But guys, like I said, I am curious to hear your guys' thoughts on Space Jam: A New Legacy, as well as, honestly, No Sudden Move. If you've seen either of them or both of them, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And yeah, again, thank you very much for watching. Subscription, notification bell, and I'll catch you guys later.